right, so we're going to take a look at an angle of the Ime Udoka Celtics sexual scandal saga that hasn't been discussed too much of it. Even a lot of the commentators I've seen have not discussed one aspect of confusion that's been expressed by some commentators like Perkins. Take a look at those in a moment. There's confusion on their part about a lack of symmetrical accountability between Ime Udoka and whatever female Celtics employee he was hooking up with. And we're going to get into the ideological mechanism that underlies it. So we'll start off with this from Steve. I'm still not into any of the bullshit situation because that's not the point when we're analyzing it from an ideological perspective. Well, really from an ideological perspective, but we're analyzing it on ideology is what I should have said, rather.
News reports it was a consensual relationship that violated organizational policy. Only he is in violation of the company policy. The woman who elected to have a consensual relationship with him, he is not violation and put on Front Street. We don't know who she is. What about the other women in the Celtics organization who are victimized because wrong assumptions have been made by their involvement? If you knew exactly who it was, that would alleviate the concerns of all the other women who have had their names paraded out into the...
Two things here. The thing that he's doing is he is basically just expressing his confusion about why these other women weren't punished. And so we'll get into the reasons why, but I just want to establish that that's the main point of confusion for someone like Stephen A. If the relationship is consensual, Stephen A doesn't understand why the punishment isn't equitable. Okay? So we'll kind of quickly move ahead to a response that Malika Andrews had to... It's not actually to this criticism. They're talking about a press conference that the Celtics had, which failed to provide enough detail to prevent rampant speculation about which female employee it was that Ime Udoka was hooking up with. But what we want to hear here, what we want to listen for here, is the conduct of Malika Andrews. She has the tone of someone in a position of authority speaking to a subject. And when we want to answer today's question, this authoritative tone that she's taking is a piece of the puzzle. Malika is the ideological operative within ESPN at this point. At least one of them. She's one of the main ideological operatives. And so operating in service to the ideology. Surprise, surprise. And let's see what she has to say. Here we go.
The fact that it was able to go on all day. The fact that we sit here debating whether somebody else should have been suspended or not. We are not here, Stephen A., to further blame women. That is not why we are here.
First of all,
right. So the idea that Stephen A. Smith expresses his confusion why a sexual relationship should have both parties equally from the perspective of the Celtics organization. She comes out and forcefully reminds them that they're not there to blame women. And she doesn't even qualify that with saying women Celtics organization. Here, what you see is Malika Andrews rather manipulatively trying to leverage women as a larger identity group in order to add weight and punch to her argument for Stephen A. Smith. And so we're going to move to this other interaction. And this is a different panel, obviously. I'm going to play some clips that are out of chronological order here, but it's I think it has a little bit more explanatory power this one. To Kendrick Perkins coming in. And then in her response to Kendrick Perkins, you're going to hear Brittany Andrews refer to a segment from this woman here on the right, who's an NBA player, plays a role as a commentator as well. And so let's listen to what Kendrick Perkins has to say. Obviously, one of the more articulate sports commentators working today.
Bring in our NBA analyst Ken Perkins into this conversation because Perk, you played for the Celtics
This motherfucker looks confused. He's even said anything.
Organization. What were your thoughts on this message here?
Well, to me, I didn't like Brad comments on this, and let me explain why. Not that he was taking up and protecting the women in the organization, but he said speculations and a Twitter BS and things to that nature, and how unfair it was to the women in the organization that is not involved with this particular situation. And I get that, right? But why is it speculations? It's speculations because of the reports that were put out by the actual Boston Celtics. So they didn't do a great job from the jump of actually protecting the women in their organization, because knowing that they were going to sit up here and give out this information and go out here and suspend and talk about, just give a little details, is going to have people speculating. And in my eyes, I feel like the Boston Celtics dropped the ball not only in protecting their entire franchise, but in protecting the women as well. They should have made sure that they crossed their T's and dotted their I's before they put this information out. And I get it. Now we're to this point. Now he had to go on here and he had to say this and he had to say that to protect those innocent women. But at the end of the day, man, it just ain't right how they went about it. The word accountability.
All right, so here we'll have Kendrick getting into his piece. And let's listen to his comments on accountability in this situation.
But at the end of the day, man, it just ain't right how they went about it. The word accountability, okay? Accountability doesn't just go to Ime Udoka, okay? Accountability goes to the other people that played a part in that as well. Let me tell you another thing I didn't like about my good friend Expect and Brad Stevens. When they asked, is anybody else going to be punished? And they said no. And my whole thing is this. These are some of the facts that have been out. These are some facts that I know that, this relationship, one of these relationships that was had, one of these relationships with Ime Udoka and one of these women, it was consensual, meaning that the woman actually part in it too. So my thing is, yes, Ime Udoka was wrong. We get that. His punishment, he deserved that, and whatever else follows, I hate it for him, but he put himself in this position. But why are the other people getting left off the hook? Well, that's the problem.
All right, so before we listen to her, again, condescending response, we're going to briefly take a detour into the earlier part of that segment where we've got this chick explaining some things. So, again, we see Kendrick expressing the same confusion as Stephen A. did. It's a consensual relationship. And to them, the word consensual has a definition. And in this case, they're right. But they've been raised where if people consent to some activity, then it's all good as long as they're the appropriate age, etc. Now, what's interesting about this part of the segment, again, was earlier chronologically, is the way that this chick and Adrian Wojnarowski get into why they think this situation played out the way it did.
Watching the press conference, I actually took notes, and there were two things.
Wow, she took notes at the conference to be reporting on. It's really going above and beyond the Call of Duty.
And I'd like to reiterate that we all heard. One, that the Celtics brought in an independent law firm to conduct the investigation, and I know that. So, what you see here is a willingness to hide behind the idea of a law firm. And so you got to remember a couple things. When you hear someone respond to the criticism like that, right?
This is a person hiding the expertise and the objectivity, supposed, of this team of lawyers that was hired to do an outside investigation. Obviously, the Celtics are going to have their own HR people performing this investigation, but lawyers have no ideological priorities? Is that something that you can count on? Or is the reality that lawyers are the main people who manipulate the system of rules and regulations in order to fit a certain ideological agenda? Oftentimes, working on competing priorities depending on who's paying them at the time. I mean, I'm not making a moral judgment about that. I'm just making an observation about the reality some lawyers tend to do. And so the idea that them hiring lawyers for something that's not a legal matter, this is at the most a violation of workplace policy for the Celtics. There's no law against fucking a coworker. Your spouse probably won't like it, but there's no law against it. So the idea that the lawyers have some sort of weight on their input in the situation is really just buying into the cachet of elitism that follows with that.
There's a lot of chatter online about, this was a consensual relationship between two, adults, whatever the case.
And this is, make no mistake, as I said, this is their response to the idea that the woman should be punished as well in a consensual relationship. So here's the main reason for the main piece of analysis to take away from this is that according to the ideological progressives, consent cannot be granted up the hierarchy. So if a head coach of a basketball team hooks up with anybody that's lower on the organizational hierarchy, which is damn near anybody but the owner, like the VP of basketball operations, it's invalid. It's not able to give consent for the same reason Harvey Weinstein, can tell some chick, "Hey, I'll give you this movie part if you give me head or whatever," and the consent that a young lady might give in that position, according to progressive ideologues, is invalid. So I'm just talking about the world as they purport it to be. And the main ideological mechanism, as I said, that's at play in the confusion of Stephen A. Smith and Kendrick Perkins in the situation. I'm going to let her continue, and we're going to put a slightly finer point on this.
Because the internet and social media takes a life of its own. But when the workplace is involved with relationships, there's protocols, there's rules, there's standards that elevated this beyond.
Notice she didn't say laws. So lawyers don't really have any sort of special knowledge of the workplace regulations of the Celtics organization. Therefore, the hiring of the lawyers in this situation is purely a PR move. And obviously, the public relations conduit that is the media is eating it up.
To having an independent external law firm come in and make these determinations. And this also shows that, this was based on facts and findings that we may not be privy to or should have.
Holy shit, this WNBA player turned reporter wants to let us know that not only were this investigation was based on facts and findings. So if you thought it was just facts, you were half right. If you thought it was just findings, you were half right. But if you could get together, and you would have a perfect Reese's Pieces like harmony of facts and findings, not just one or the other.
Be privy to. And that's the first thing that stood out. The second thing is that no one else is facing penalty other than Ime Udoka. And I feel like this is important because
that's like barely even that's been talked about. That was Kendrick Perkins' main criticism. I'm not even going to waste your time fucking talking about that bullshit. But we want to get to Woj here. What he has to say is, without saying #MeToo, he basically explains that this shit wouldn't have happened like 6 years ago.
A different time in professional sports where, I know people might say there have been these situations in the that they didn't come to light. I think Wick Grossbeck said it, the Celtics are a corporation and a business. And that perhaps 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 7 years ago, however, it might have been treated differently by an organization because a successful head coach is, no one's irreplaceable, but certainly they, as a basketball coach, Ime Udoka, as a leader, they believed, and for good reason, that they had an individual that would be for a very long time leading this organization. An organization maybe in the past would have found a way for this to have not escalated to an internal, bringing a law firm to do an investigation, and then to mete out this kind of punishment. And so I think...
And so what he's saying here is that before the Me Too era, a.k.a. 5, 7, 3 years ago, the organization would have just said, oh yeah, it was a consensual relationship, 2 adults decided to fuck, and we're going to be cool with that. But now, in the post-Me Too era, they have to apply the analysis of power dynamics because postmodernism has fully asserted itself upon the NBA. And you've got people like Malika Andrews who are the ideological police for this movement. That's the reason why Malika Andrews has a fucking job at ESPN. And so this whole situation, if you wanted to brand it, could be considered an intersectional car crash.